of the private sector, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry has consistently raised concerns and proposed solutions to tackle issues such as rising inflation, declining GDP, crude oil supply crisis, and the increasing cost of doing business in the country. The Chamber has consistently advocated for policy reforms targeted at interventions and collaborations among stakeholders to address these pressing challenges facing the Nigerian economy. Let's get talking more around this. I'm being joined by the president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Gabriel Idahosa. Good afternoon, Mr. Idahosa. It's good to have you on the program. I cannot hear you.
I said thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's good to have you. Yes, it's good to have you, Mr. President. Now it's been a while, and I'd like us to take it a bit back to the last time we had you on the program. We were looking at the policies instituted by this administration, of course, to help achieve inclusive growth and promote trade and, of course, businesses across the country. Months have gone, a year gone in the administration and all of that, and everyone is trying to do an evaluation of what's been happening before now. You know where the shoe pinches. How has it been before we now go to some specific efforts by government at this time to also further open up the entire business space?
Well, we have seen a gradual but steady reaction and response from the government to the immediate effects of the major policy announcements at the beginning of the administration around removal of fuel subsidy, the conversions of foreign currency, and then the very high inflation that came after that, and the cost of living going, and the significant hunger and loss of jobs. But 10 months, almost, let's say 12 months down the road, we begin to see some specific actions by government to address this. We are already seeing across a number of states CNG buses on the road that have significantly reduced transport costs in those states where they already work. And we believe that if the government can just speed up the pace at which CNG vehicles are deployed around the country, we'll begin to see a downward slide in inflation that is caused by transport logistics for both food, raw materials, and other goods and services that move around the country, and commuting costs for workers and self-employed people who have to move every day around the country. So that is beginning to happen slowly and steadily. We also see some very important measures that have been announced around the removal of VAT for quite a number of very important players in the sector. In the last few days, there have been some very good news for the oil and gas industry around the completion of those major divestment transactions, which will open up significant investment and growth, in fact, rapid expansion in production, particularly gas, which we need for everything across the economy, from domestic gas to gas for power to gas feedstock for industries, and now very important, auto gas for vehicles around the country. So we are beginning to see government action in those key areas, but it is still early in the day to see how all of this will impact in reducing the cost of doing business, reducing the cost of living, and generally what is called the dividends of democracy by what the federal government and some state governments are doing. And it's important in these conversations to always include the state governments and the local governments. This administration has removed federal control over electricity and rail transport. So it is up to the states now to provide sufficient power for every resident in their states. It's up to states now, the states and groups of states, to begin to build rail lines to attract investors to do it. These are significant opportunities that this administration has opened up. And it's up to us as private sector and state governments to build very quickly on these opportunities, get investors, foreign and local, to begin to invest heavily in electricity supply in the states and rail lines across states. So these are the general picture that is emerging. The suffering is still there, the hardships are there, but there are signs that one after the other, we can see as it were the kind of light, proverbial light of the tunnel. Maybe still far away, but we seem to be moving in the direction of that light at the end of the tunnel in these specific sectors of our economy.
This breakdown you've given us looks pretty good. But a normal man or a man on the street, all he wants to see is food on his table. He wants to see that the money he has can purchase whatever he wants. So let's bring it down to that level now. And before we move to other specifics, it's like, do you think Nigerians understand that, directly, let me put it that no pain, no gain?
They understand that concept, but they feel that the pain should be much shorter than what we are seeing, and they feel that the pain should be not as harsh as we are seeing. But generally, there has been significant support for removals of subsidy, because we all knew that it was just a few Nigerians that were enjoying all the benefits of that subsidy. They also knew, most Nigerians also knew, that there were a few people who were making a lot of money, definitely unethical wealth, from arbitrage in the difference between the official exchange rates and the open market rates. So Nigerians knew that there were a small number of Nigerians that were illegally and unethically milking the economy, and they felt those decisions were right. But the conversation was, before removal of those subsidies and the foreign exchange differences, perhaps the government should have put some plans in place to mitigate the hardship that would follow. So yes, no pain, no gain is understood in principle, but the general conversation was about ensuring that there were plans in place to reduce the pain at the point at which the fuel subsidy was announced, and when the convergence of foreign currency was also put in place. So that is the mood of the country, if one were to summarize it briefly, as much as we can.
Now, we see some specific moves now by government. Now, of course, Taiwo Edele Committee, which you're aware of some of the workings of that committee, is doing a lot trying to reshape things with regards to tax and, of course, reforms on that aspect. But specifically, some executive orders have also been instituted, excise duties and values on imported pharmaceutical inputs. And this focuses on the pharmaceutical space. We know what's been happening with people complaining about hike in price of drugs and all of that. People on medication, they've been screaming. So how do you see this as another game changer for this sector of the economy?
Yeah, one of our statements actually addressed that. It's a very, very significant game changer, because the pharmaceutical industry, just like power, addresses the core of living, healthcare. Any productive economy must have healthcare security. Every person in the economy, whatever your income level, should be able to access healthcare at their level. So that those measures announced address that directly by removing the cost of pharmaceuticals, by encouraging more investments in that area, especially when some major pharmaceutical companies were moving out of the country. So we commended that. Again, like the other policies, what we are saying is that the process of implementation should be very fast. The relevant circulars to all the relevant agencies, the customs, the inland revenue, should be, once the announcement has been made by government, it should be implemented immediately. So you don't go to customs and they say, no, we have got this circular to get this done, even though, yes, we have had the announcement, on the inland revenue says, oh no, we haven't got the announcement, so we are still charging VAT. So we are expecting that very, very quickly once government has taken a decision, the entire process of implementation is put in place and the documentation is in the hand of all the stakeholders. The Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, the Manufacturers Association, Lagos Chamber of Commerce, you have copies of federal government circulars implementing those decisions. So we can present them to regulatory agencies wherever they are slow in implementing them. That's really what we are looking at as the next steps.
It's good to take it up from there and see other issues at the moment. And one of it is inflation, which many is talking about, and the issue of FX. I also want to know how business people are, or business community is reacting to this. We see a bit of stability, which we've talked about in recent times, between 1,400, 1,500. Is that where we should be? Well, I don't know, but many will say we can still do better. But how has that been, and how has it affected your members, particularly that have the import lot of their maybe materials and all of that for production?
Well, the effect has been there. Even before this administration came into office, there's limited supply of foreign currency. And so the price has been rising all the way from below 300 to around the 700s, and then suddenly to 1,500, at some point 1,900. Now it's trying to stabilize at about 1,500. The impact, of course, is obvious. The cost of products are much higher. The volume of raw materials you can bring into this country is much lower. So all manufacturers that depend on imports have been reporting much lower capacity utilization, in many cases far below 50% of plant capacity. That continues. In some extreme cases, there have been job losses. Manufacturers have had to fire people if they could not sustain them. There was enough raw materials, or the cost of importation was too high. The market prices were now too high for consumers to buy. So all that is still happening. The only thing, as you have mentioned, is there's a tendency towards stability. And everywhere in the world, primary concern is stability in the exchange rate. The actual figure doesn't matter. It is going to be 1,500, and you can predict for the next 1 year or 1.5 years, it's going to be around 1,500. Then everybody in the economy will plan with that. So that kind of stability is what everybody is more concerned that the actual figure or range of movement. And the central bank is working extremely hard to achieve that kind of stability. So it's a combination of efforts that the central bank is doing. We hope that they succeed in achieving that stability. When it's stable, then we can begin to say it's too high. Can we slowly but steadily move down from, let's say, a stable 1,500 to a stable 1,400, and then a stable 1,300, a stable 1,200 in a fairly steady but predictable, or fairly steady but manageable manner. What we don't want is a 1,500 today, tomorrow is a 1,000, the next day is 1,600, and then nobody can plan anything. So as far as trying to gravitate towards some stability, the central bank is working extremely hard. There are a whole range of measures that they have applied, and it seems to be working that far. But what the private sector can really do to support that effort is to increase exports, to export more and to export much more across all products and services. Our foreign exchange rate should not be determined by our export of crude oil. This economy is too large, too diversified to be dependent on the price of crude oil in the international market and the quantity of crude oil we produce per day. We have to get an economy that attracts foreign currency from everything, from music, from the movies, from tourism, from IT. The IT sector is now attracting a lot of foreign currency into Nigeria. Our IT industry is now very big in Africa. But we need to do much more in consciously developing and growing more export products and services. That's the real solution. Before we do that, the central bank will continue to struggle to try and ensure some stability around the total export earnings we can make now. But the really big move is when we see a very steady increase in our exports of goods and services. Then the job becomes easier for the central bank.
Finally, before I let you go, we talk every time about trade, and LCCI says government needs to simplify trade. What do we really mean when we say government simplifying trade, and what sort of conversation should we be having around trade facilitation at this time? We see smuggling and movement of arms and all of that in recent times, as the Nigerian Customs Services bring into the news. We can see what is trying to come in. What sort of conversation are we supposed to be having around trade at this time?
So let's break it down very, very simply. If you want to import goods in Nigeria, how many steps does it take to clear the goods? If in another country you have just 3 steps when the goods arrive in the port of that country, and 3 steps the goods are out of the port, and it gets into a trailer or a truck taking it to your factory, it just takes 3 steps. When the goods leave your factory, nobody stops that truck until it gets to your factory. And then you have another country like Nigeria where you probably have 15 or 20 steps in the ports. And when the goods leave the port, you have a long list of checkpoints, legal or illegal, stopping and collecting money along the way. That is the facilitation of trade. The same thing with domestic movement. The number of checkpoints and people collecting money as we move around the country, that is the issue of facilitation of trade. The same thing about if you want to get a permit to import or a permit to put electricity in your factory, how many steps does it take to get the permit and actually put it? How many steps does it take to get your CFO to build your factory? Those very basic things that make business to move faster. So the general conversation in Nigeria is that the number of steps involved in all those regulatory processes can and should be drastically reduced, because we are not the only country that operates those transactions. They can be reduced, they can be made less expensive. The amount of illegal operators, government agencies, some of them self-appointed without authority from their offices, who interrupt the flow of trade, needs to be removed. And it's extremely difficult, but the government is working hard. So that's really the conversation about facilitation of trade. It's not complicated when you break it down the way we are saying it. But of course, there's a big word about facilitation of trade, but this is what it comes to. And it's all the governments, the federal, the states, the local governments, they are all responsible for some of these complicated processes and systems that we have to deal with in the business community.
President, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Gabriel Idahosa, thank you so much. It's always nice to have you join the program. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.